Welcome to another AVID Chat. David Harple and Jack Arnold. Jack, good to see you today.
How's it going, Dave?
Coldest year of 2022 for us St. Pete Floridians.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's cold outside.
Pretty chilly out there. It's not, Ohio weather as we say, and snow, but it's brisk. So it feels nice, actually.
Yeah.
If you're joining us today, we're going to talk about, I guess, what we would maybe throw into that kind of tactical bucket. And it really is surrounding debt and how you pay things off. There's two common themes out there that if you Google this or maybe you've heard it in terms of the approach of paying off debt. Let's say you have multiple cards or student loans or car payments, doesn't really matter what the debt is, but one is the Snowball approach and another one is an Avalanche approach. So we're going to talk through those two things, some pros and cons, and just some food for thought as you approach if you're trying to pay off debt. And let's just start with, I think where this comes from is that if you've ever had multiple lines of credit or debts or credit cards, there is some sort of, I guess, psychological barrier to paying them off because it's like, where do I go? What do I do first? And that's really where this is stemming from.
Yeah. I mean, this is one of those things where the saying that, personal finance is more personal than it is finance. I feel like we beat this to death. It really depends on your own situation. Some of the decisions can be more stark if just to define the two, a snowball being you start with your smallest balance that you owe, you pay that off, whatever you were paying towards that plus whatever extra you apply to the next highest balance. That's kind of the snowball effect. That's getting bigger over time. You're going towards the bigger ones. An avalanche is mostly you're starting with the highest interest rate card, paying that off as much as you can, and then again going down. So you're coming from largest to smallest in terms of interest rate.
Yep.
It's really the two differences. Now, that doesn't mean that your smallest balance can't be your highest interest rate either. I mean, sometimes that is the case. So it really depends. In terms of the two different versions, that's really kind of what we're talking about. Do you start with the smallest balance, or do you start with the highest interest rate if those two things are different? If your highest interest rate is 20% and your lowest is 2, I mean, that's a big difference. But it's not uncommon to have multiple. You have two credit cards are both 15%. So it's not always so cut and dry. So some of it is personal. Do you want to start knocking stuff out? Like, you want to start getting rid of things quickly? Sometimes it's better to start small. A lot of times you get some momentum. That tends to be a little bit more, satisfactory, I guess, encouraging. If you get some things, you start moving in the right direction versus if you have a big balance with a high interest rate, sometimes you're plugging away on that thing for a while. It seems like you're not making a ton of progress.
Yeah, and I do want to add, like, on the snowballing, it is really focused on that smallest balance first. So you make your payment, you pay extra to that. This is all assuming you have extra cash flow. Extra cash flow goes to the next payment. You pay that first one off. Let's say you had a minimum $100 a month payment. You were making an extra $100 a month towards the principal. You pay it off. Now you take that $200, add it onto your next card and its minimum balance. And then when that goes off, let's say that minimum payment was $75. Well, now you have $275, and you keep working that way so that the payment that you're applying to the next card is the snowball that's getting bigger. And I think you bring up a good point. Some of it is psychological. You might be paying off a low balance, low rate card prior to a higher balance, higher rate card. And math might say, maybe not perfect, ideal, but psychologically, little wins over time can really help you gain momentum to say, man, I've knocked out 2 of these little cards just like that, and now I'm putting $400 on this other car payment or loan that I didn't even think I'd get to for a while. And that's definitely been proven in experience with clients and with ourselves even that it does help build momentum.
Yeah, sometimes it's just hard to pull the trigger to pay the stuff off. Like, that's sometimes the hardest thing. And maybe sometimes starting small is the thing to do, because it's hard to, sometimes pull the trigger on paying, thousands of dollars a month, let's say, towards a high balance and see it not go anywhere. Like, sometimes you just need to start small and, like you said, get some wins. And we've seen people do it both ways. So there's no,
Absolutely.
and both ways have worked just fine. I can't really say that I have a preference either way. I would say, kind of the logical way would be to pay the highest interest rate first. But it's ultimately you want to get this stuff paid off. And if it takes you an extra 3 months because you start with the smallest balance, well, then so be it. Like, it is what it is. I think that would be fine. One thing you said was, we beat this to death, and this goes back to lots of things. It's like whether you're doing Snowball or Avalanche, most of it is just if you're trying to pay off debt to build net worth over time, a big portion of that is going to be how much cash are you going to allocate to this. If it's in knowing that first will give you an idea of what you can do in terms of whether it is Snowball or Avalanche. Because if your minimum on your highest interest rate is all the cash flow that you have, well, then you kind of, you can't not make your payment on the highest interest rate either. So I think you would first have to start, like we would normally say, is how much cash are you willing to apply to this bucket, let's say, this kind of debt payoff bucket, and having some kind of idea of what your cash flow situation is. If you pay an extra, doesn't even matter how much, $500, $1,000, $2,000 towards paying off debt, where are you sacrificing that? What are you giving up in order to do that? And having a clear idea of what that is, because what you don't want to do is start paying off a whole bunch of debt, and then at some point some big bill comes up and it goes right back on the credit card because you haven't really planned out or have an idea of what your cash flow situation is. So
no doubt.
That's a big one.
I think another thing that we've come across is the just kind of the juxtapose where I'm saving, but I'm saving. Yeah, I have some credit card debt, but I'm also saving.
Yes.
So we'll have people that have, it doesn't matter, auto loan, credit card, whatever. Let's just call it debt. They have debt. Let's exclude the mortgage because I think that's a different animal to talk about. So more revolving type of credit. Yet they're contributing to a 401k. That maybe they're maxing out a Roth IRA, and it's almost like a psychological justification to have the credit card debt because I'm also putting $500 a month into my Roth IRA. And I would argue, and correct me if you disagree, that it makes zero sense to be putting money into a Roth IRA or any retirement plan if you have a credit card that's at 15, 16, 20%, because that's like guaranteed rate of return paying that sucker off first, as opposed to, again, putting money in towards retirement.
I agree 100%. I mean, this is probably one of the more common examples of where kind of tactics take over strategy, where I think people have internalized, I need to save money for retirement, let's say. You're just beat in the face with it constantly of put money in your 401k, and like it's
right.
You're just inundated with that as information. So people think, and I think rightfully so, well, okay, cool, put money in my 401k, yeah, I can do that. Meanwhile, you have credit card debt outside of that, and you're just applying a quick tactic, save money. People have internalized, I need to save money, so they start saving money, and then like you said, there's debt on the other side. That's what happens when you're just applying tactics to different things, is they start competing with each other, and you're not really getting anywhere. You're applying lots of tactics, let's say, to various things that you've heard various places, but you're not really moving in any direction. You're just doing tactics kind of siloed.
Right.
They're individual tactics that you're running when really all of those things are intertwined. So that's a great point. I've seen that so many times. It's very frequent, I would say. That's
So
how often you see something like that.
And the premise is, what you said earlier, if you're trying to build net worth, it's assets and liabilities. So you have two sides of the equation. If you have $50,000 in a retirement plan and $50,000 in debt, that's a zero net worth. So how do you switch that? Because if you keep doing the same on both sides, you're always going to have a zero net worth. So we would say, this is a blanket statement, not true advice for you if you're listening, but it might make sense to stop putting money into the retirement plan, pound down the debt so that liability gets lessened and lessened, and that in itself increases your net worth even though you're not saving for retirement. Where it gets tricky, and we have seen this, we've helped people put together plans of doing just that, right? Mm-hmm. Redirecting, let's call it retirement money, paying off debt. Sounds great. They're feeling awesome. Maybe it's 12 months, 18 months, doesn't matter. They get rid of the debt. The tricky part now is to take all of that money that's been going to pay down debt and reapply it back into either retirement or whatever the goals that you have are, because the first thing you're going to want to do is spend the money. I got extra money, and we've seen that happen too. So this is not what's the saying? It's easy in theory, difficult in practice type of thing.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, all this stuff is easy in theory. It's easy to talk about it. It's harder to do it. I mean, this is why everybody has such a tough time with it, is because it's not easy. Like, the simple, not easy. The very simple solutions are very difficult to implement on a consistent basis. So yeah, that definitely happens. I think that helps. Again, I know I beat this to absolute death all the time, but that's a cash flow thing. Is if you have cash flow that you've set aside to build with, then that cash flow is meant to build, and then you can allocate that amongst whatever you need to allocate it to in order to build over time. And to your point, some of that is paying off liabilities, but some of it's building up assets. And as long as you've set aside that chunk, bucket, whatever you want to call it, towards building, I think it helps because you've kind of mentally tagged it as this is money for building over time. But that's a great point. That does happen for sure.
Yep. Any other thoughts on this is kind of a quick overview of Snowball and Avalanche, but that's it in the gist without building a spreadsheet for you. And you can go online and Google this. I did it right before the call. There's all sorts of charts and graphs and easy ways to do this. Obviously, we're here as well, but that's it in a nutshell. You have anything else to add?
No, I think that's it. I think that's, any strategy is better than no strategy. So whichever one you pick, I think would be good. And I think, having a plan, having some kind of rules in place, I think is always good. Whether you snowball it or you avalanche it, I think either way is fine as long as you have some kind of plan and stick with it over time. I think it'd be good to go.
Yep, sounds good. Thanks for joining us for another AVID Chat. As we always say, like, comment, subscribe to the channel, pack it on to a friend that you might think might get some value here, and we'll see you again next week.
All right.